All right, thanks for staying with us. Let's have a conversation now that looks at the developments around the men who are accused of the murder in Lusikisiki of about 18 people. And of course, this is not the only murder that we've seen in recent times. But according to Police Minister Senzo Mchunu, very disturbing information to hear from him. They're saying it's possible that the massacre may have been planned from prison. At the same time, one of the accused was out on parole for murder while the massacre took place. So let's talk about this further to understand as to why would somebody who's been released from the correctional facilities system then risks going back. So let's speak to Dr. Liza Grobler, criminologist. Singabakho Nxumalo is a correctional services spokesperson, and Professor Saths, Pan-African Psychology Union president. Let me thank you all for your time this evening. I'm going to start with you, Prof. Did it shock you when you heard that one of the accused is a parolee and was released after serving time, a bit of time for murder?
No. I think it's one of the unfortunate consequences of our system being very strained, and that there seems to be a lack of coordination in how we deal with very serious crime. Part of the problem is a consequence of Bill of Rights issues with members of the magistracy as well as the judiciary imposing very individual sentences instead of us having a minimum codification in our law. That's part of it, but it's also because there's money in what they do. There's huge money rolling on these issues, and I don't know what's behind some of it, but you can almost guess that there's likely to be organized syndicates, and these ought to be picked up by our intelligence agencies. We have enough intelligence agencies, and I think that they have been coming to the party more recently. Under Minister Mchunu, I think there's going to be a shake-up, and from what we see with the national and other commissioners, there is some action, but that's reactive. We need to be proactive and moving into the preventative mode. But we also have a huge socioeconomic problem. As I was driving here, the HSRC statistics hit us of 63% and more of our families, our households, being what they call food insecure. Now, we use English in that way, but basically meaning people are starving. So when you've got a huge, unsustainable economic situation, there needs to be a rethink completely, and particularly now that you've got this mixed government, people need to say who's responsible for what and where is the wealth going that is not being shared with ordinary South Africans.
Dr. Liza, I'm going to bring you in. Dr. Liza, pardon me, I'm going to bring you into this conversation. Now, someone is in a correctional facility because they committed a crime, they go through whatever processes of rehabilitation, but then they are released on parole. And somebody would think that they would, celebrate the freedom and not want to go back. And yet here we are with a parolee, and it's not the first time we're finding ourselves here. What would drive somebody to do that, in your view?
Thanks, Bongiwe. I'm not sure if you can see me, but I can't see you.
We can see you.
Okay, I can't see you. So, all right, so we need to look at a couple of things. If we're sort of starting at the back end now, so once they are released, there are numerous factors that can influence their reoffending. For example, the community corrections, their main function is to monitor parolees. In other words, that they don't break parole conditions. That's their main function. But there doesn't appear to be any other support. So say, for example, community corrections doesn't help offenders with finding employment. And employment is one of the biggest setbacks or bugbears we have in terms of getting offenders onto the straight and narrow. The correctional services might give them good programs, they might give them skills, they might educate them, but once they go out, what then? They're going into a pool of unemployment, they're right at the bottom of the list, and unless they have support from their families or they go out to a job, their chances of reoffending again are are huge. So support is a major issue, but there are other issues too, which happen inside the correctional centre before they are released, even before the parole process. But I'm sure you'd want to get to that.
What are some of these? What are some of these factors that are happening inside?
Okay, so let's take one that happens inside and outside. Let's look at the issue of gangsterism. Gangsterism in the correctional centres or prisons, call them what you will, is huge. It's huge. And I don't believe that correctional services is getting a grip on it. And there's a confluence. There's a confluence between the prison number gang and the street gangs outside. So very often, unless an offender really, really wants to change, they will come in from a street gang and go out a number or join their number in prison and then go back to their street gang again. So, unless there's major intervention in his own mind or major decision in his own mind that he wants to change, the chances of him reoffending or going back to the gang for assistance, for survival, for whatever reason, is huge. So yeah, there's a lot of issues.
Singabakho, I'm going to bring you in. Before I add a layer in this discussion, a question for you, but I'd like your response to what you've just heard.
South Africa, I think we've got to acknowledge the fact that we've got a problem with crime. And it calls for all of us as society to do something about it. We often say in correctional services that corrections is a societal responsibility. But the real test is when a person has been rehabilitated, ready to be placed out, but to find that even his own family, his own local community is saying, no, Brajo must die in prison. Then that tells you something else. Hence, we always reach out.
How do you balance that? How do you balance a scenario like that? Because I would assume that it is important for them to have support, listening to what we just heard today, and then if you release them, where do they go?
In terms of our policies, we cannot place a person out without a support structure. It therefore means that person will stay with us until that sentence expires. And when that sentence expires by law, we cannot keep that person. We have to release that person. But at times you find that other people will sign to say, I will be a caregiver to this individual. Yet they don't honor the responsibility that comes with it. When we do monitoring, you find that a person has not been sleeping home, or a person is starving, or has a number of challenges, and we're not informed about it. Already there are challenges there. And when we pick up those, we have to then take those people back into our system, which is not a nice thing because there's a lot of investment that the state does in a person. For instance, you've got someone like Nsmashai Khamatabata. He's doing wonderful work. He was released. He realized that, you know what, I've acquired so much skills behind bars, but no one is willing to give me employment. He then started farming because something that he was doing
But how many of them are doing that?
You have so many positive cases, but you'll never get to hear about it. It's only when someone that has been in our care has then done something wrong. Because you look at the case of Sipositu. I mean, he was sentenced in 2002. And by law, he ought to have been considered for parole after 12 years and 6 months. But he was only placed out after serving 21 years. You look at the amount of years that he spent with us. Then you have to ask yourself, what happened when he was placed out? Because he was being monitored, but somewhere there, something then dropped.
So, Prof, is it about the monitoring only? Because if somebody served as much of time as he did behind bars, and you say he was being monitored, Singabakho, you say there was a process that was being followed, but Prof, is that the only problem here? Because it sounds like this is somebody that may have walked out of the system with a clear intention not to change, possibly.
Yes and no. I think that the factors raised are pertinent. But crime is a consequence of something else. People just don't do crime ordinarily. It's important to recognize that the majority of citizens in our country were, until 30 years ago, regarded as criminal. Right? The pass laws, being shipped out to farms, the dreaded Section 10s, etc. So on that base, you have a laissez-faire democracy, where a Janus Wallus can get released by the Concord on the same day that the Concord delivers judgment that President Zuma needs to be in prison. Now, there's something wrong with how we view ourselves and who we damn, because ordinary people will not engage in the levels of crime they do if there wasn't an attraction to do that. And while we may talk of prisoners coming out and no jobs, we have the highest, arguably, rate of recorded unemployment in the world, and that doesn't include the prison population. So ordinary citizens, and now we're just entering in the matric season. What are we doing for those kids to make sure they don't become statistics? So we need to rethink this whole thing. It's not about crime and punishment. It's about our system, our education system, the ability to socialize people differently. That's where it begins.
So I suppose then, Dr. Liza, to Singabakho's point, it needs an approach that is more than that of the correctional services then.
Yes. Remember, there's only so much correctional services can do. So with our crime rate, our high crime rate, for example, if an offender is you'd be surprised how many offenders in our system, for example, were raped as young boys. So if they're coming from a background where there is no support, or it's not reported or it's not treated, then correctional services can't do anything about that, okay? They can't do anything about the fallout from that particular issue, or a kid that grew up in a domestic violence situation or a violent community, whatever the case may be. Correctional services doesn't have control over that. They don't have control over that individual's trajectory after these traumatic incidents. And they will grow up with unadulterated, untreated trauma. And very often that manifests into criminal behavior. But now once they get into a correctional center or a prison, whichever you'd like to call it, then correctional services most certainly can try and assist them with the means they have at hand to rehabilitate them and to help them and most importantly to treat them.
And how, pardon me for coming in there, how easy will it be will it be to do that? Because the prisons are overcrowded in and in themselves.
Yes.
So are they managing to then be able to deal with the influx and also rehabilitate people in a manner that is supposed to be unfolding as per the prescripts?
Okay. So yes, the situational problems are big. I mean, you can't tell me that somebody who's served a 5-year sentence in Pollsmoor walks out rehabilitated. It's not possible. It's overcrowded. It's riddled with gangsterism. The infrastructure is absolutely appalling, and you know that's one example. But you get others where they try really hard. But there are shortcomings. There are definitely shortcomings. So, you know, you start with assessment. What is the quality of assessment in correctional services? To me, it's problematic. Yes, you get pockets that are very good. Let's not forget that. But the other areas where it's problematic. And assessments are done by case assessment officials, and they are security officials. They're not social work graduates or criminology graduates or psychology graduates. So there isn't much depth. And again, I'll say, if you don't pick up criminogenic factors, how can you treat them? And how can you give that individual coping mechanisms not to do it again? That is my concern. So corrections needs to up their game with that kind of thing. They need to up their games with the programs. There are big issues there. They have good skills, but yeah, there is a lot more they can do, and also by just hiring professionals. We have something like 75 psychologists for 160,000 offenders. I mean, it's like one per 2,000. It's impossible.
And it speaks to the resources. Singabakho, as you answer that question, of resources, of ensuring that you do have the minds that you need to be able to perform this task. Also give us a sense of the numbers when you talk about the fact that there's more that are in fact rehabilitated and go out there to do more work, positive work in society versus those who reoffend. Our
parolees caseload, meaning people who are out serving their sentences in the communities, it's 53,500. That is a big number, but it is manageable. But when you come inside our facilities, we have a population of 159,700. That's an overcrowding of 48%, closer to 50%. At times you go above and then drop. It depends on how much work.
That's a recipe for disaster.
So what does it mean? It therefore says, yes, our resources will be strained. We therefore have to do more with the little that we have. But one thing
But is the little effective?
Yes. One thing that we make it a point that we do it as per the mandate is that when people are admitted, they get assessed, and they are assessed thoroughly. Hence, we give ourselves a period of 21 days to say, beside the fact that we were brought to us with a sentence of 12 years having committed murder, now we need to understand who is behind Wongi, what's happening, why did you have to commit the offense that you committed? Are there any other factors?
Who is assessing them, though?
So
is it professionals?
We have an array of professionals there. You have social workers, psychologists, even criminologists, are involved there. At some point, people are saying only one, which is not true. Yes, 41, some may say it's not enough, but you look at the management areas that we have, we're even able to share those particular skills. But you've got a sufficient pool of professionals who are able to say, within that 21-day period, they are able to assess a person and then throw up what you call a correctional sentence plan. Because that correctional sentence plan also factors in the issue of parole. People often think that parole comes in when the person is just to be placed out, whereas it's involved from the beginning to say, if you're given a 12-year sentence, when are you likely to reach a minimum detention period, which is 6 months? By then, would you have benefited from those programs or not? And how will the case management committee put together a profile before you go before the parole board? All those things are factored in, so that at the end of the day, we do not place a person out that will go out there and embarrass us. Many of them do good, but we have a few that disappoint us. It is then therefore a question of saying, what are the factors that are then pushing these people back into the life of crime? Gangsterism, yes, could be one of them, but lack of support, our research does indicate that is the biggest factor. But then, as a department, for instance, we went and camped in Lusikisiki in August and September 2023 because we identified that there is a problem here in Lusikisiki. We even offered programs there targeting the youth in terms of ICT, fixing mobile phones, how to install set-top boxes, and entrepreneurship as a way of saying, rather than just sitting back and saying we'll only do what we can once people are with us, let's see if we can do something whilst they're out there.
So, Prof, we're hearing now, correctional services are saying that they do have a pool of these professionals, but you then hear about this overcrowding, which is a reality. Is it really as effective as it should be? Because yes, there can be a pool of those that can go around, but are they really enough?
I don't think that is the question. The question is, really, in our correctional system right now, we just went through an election. You know that the IEC went through a process of getting those prisoners on the voters' roll. Our kids who are over 18, has the IEC reached out to them? So we're looking at this thing the wrong way. We look at something that happened. We'll come back here in a few months and discuss another case. We have not dealt with all the evidence through stats, and these are insurmountable, that we're not managing our democracy in the way we should. It starts with an appropriate education. We need to prevent kids falling between the cracks. We need to be able to hold them to be our future, which we don't.
And you talk about that because it's important. The monitoring is important, because if we are still having conversations about the matric results where we cannot track some of those who started and we don't know where they fell through the cracks in between.
The numbers that come through are a minority. The stats tell us that. So all those kids that fall between the cracks, they prey to these syndicates and these groups that really molest our children. Now we've heard about rape and so on. All that, they are effects. They're not the causes. The majority of our people don't have social and economic stability. And that is the issue. If they had, they wouldn't turn to crime. But it's a quick fix. When you see somebody else, they've got decent clothes, they're able to do certain things, but you are left out of the system, the gang system, the system that introduces you to their ways of thinking and against society. Because if society was strong enough, you know, we've also heard about community, but you know what? That community only exists in suburbia. It does not exist. Take any so-called township, and we still use those words. That tells us that we've got a serious job to do. We can't blame correctional services, which is your last bulwark against the tide that is rising of crime. We've gone through a reality show for the last few years with corruption being parlayed out there almost in real time. Where are the consequences of all that?
And now we are contending with extortion.
Absolutely.
So certainly, as Singabakho says, crime is a huge problem in South Africa. But Dr. Liza, what conversations do communities and families then have? Because if correctional services are saying that they also did the work and their own data is telling them that this lack of support is also a huge factor, what conversations do we have as communities and as families, even against all these issues that Prof is mentioning that we are also contending with on a daily basis?
You mean in terms of not
of supporting, of supporting those who are being released, yes.
Yeah. Now look, support is absolutely pivotal, as I say, and a part of that support is something like employment. But what the conversation society should really have is, or the question they should ask is, how to help these individuals, the ones that want to change. There is also an element of choice sometimes involved in criminality, definitely. I mean, I've had offenders tell me that, look, he'll make in 5 minutes what, you know, with crime that he can make in a month being a labourer, whatever the case may be. So there is the element of choice, But families and communities need to have a conversation of how do we help these individuals. They've come out of prison, they've got carpentry skills, they've got a good education. How can we help? Can we partner with NGOs like NICRO, or somehow do some sort of fundraising to get them seed capital to start their own business? Those are the sort of conversations we should have. But I'm sorry, I'm not letting Singabakho off the hook here. He was saying that we have criminologists, and people are saying there's only one, which is not true. The best of my knowledge, there is only one working as a criminologist, and there are no, and he's actually a security official. There are no posts for criminologists, so I'd just like him to clarify that statement.
Let's get him to clarify it.
We have a total of 41 criminologists in correctional services.
41?
41, yes.
Dr. Liza, he says 41.
41.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, yes, with criminology degrees, but they're not working as criminologists. There are no posts for criminologists.
I don't know if I can come in there. We have a total of 41 criminologists, but they are not just doing criminology-related work. They also do other work within our space. Where do they come in, which is the most critical area, is when we have to classify inmates. When people come to our facilities, I said we assess them. That's where, because there is very important to say, who is this person? And the level of classification, are you a maximum risk or a medium risk? But also, what are other factors that may not be on paper when you're brought to us? That's where we need that particular skill. But they also come in that value chain within the correctional services system. It's the same as with the psychologist. The one who deals with an inmate is not the one who will do an assessment when that person is due for parole consideration, because you now need an independent eye which will say, okay, having studied everything here, I'm convinced that this person is now different. This person will grab a second chance.
All right. I think, as all three of you are saying, a proactive approach is needed here. And Prof, as you say, it's time to have the conversations before things happen in order to be able to address a myriad of issues that South Africans are facing, because sometimes you may find that families are saying we cannot support because we ourselves are overwhelmed.
Absolutely.
You never know. There's a lot going on right now. So certainly it will be interesting to see what conversations then do happen going forward, because even the police minister now says he wants to have a conversation with the Minister of Correctional Services. Let's see what also happens in that particular regard, because a lot of socioeconomic issues are also further compounding the situation. So certainly, thank you so much to you all for your time. That was Dr. Liza Grobler, the criminologist, Singabakho Nxumalo, Correctional Services spokesperson, and Professor Saths, Pan-African Psychology Union President.